The grouping of ideas that says in this most recent time that we've got to blame the eastern staters.
In the Northern Basin, the 2008 sale of Turali Station near Burke to the federal and New South Wales governments raises questions about government choices on property purchases and buybacks of water.
This massive property was due to go under the hammer today, but there was an 11th hour offer from the government that the owners couldn't refuse.
This is us taking action, as we said we would, to help restore the health of the rivers in the Murray-Darling Basin.
Morning, John.
Hey, David.
How are you?
Very good.
Good. I think it was a Mark Twain quote that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over. And I think there were, everywhere in the world, there is always tensions over water. And in this whole debate, we obviously need to get some balance between looking after the environment and maintaining sustainable productive capacity. If Turali had operated in the last water year, it would have extracted 0.01% of the flow in the Darling past it. Negligible impact on the environment, and yet huge socio-economic pain as to the local community.
The productivity that that water was creating from that property was putting in about $4 million of just gross value without considering labour to this community. The rates from that property were 4% of the council rates, which had to be spread across the other rural landholders. They had to make up the difference of that shortfall.
I think the Turali is a good microcosm of the entire Murray-Darling Basin plan, where we've seen adverse impacts of drought branded as chronic ill health, blamed on extractions. So we reduce extractions, we reduce future potential production for negligible environmental benefit.
Why should anyone care?
One of the greatest infrastructure projects ever undertaken in Australia was the Snowy Mountains scheme. Vast tracts of water were diverted into the Murray River system during production of hydroelectricity. However, some have questioned recent developments in the management of water releases. Max Tolbert is uniquely placed to comment on this issue. He was Executive Officer of Engineering at Snowy Hydro for many years and is deeply concerned about recent developments.
The flaw that I see is in the 2007 Commonwealth Water Act, which says that that's clause 21.6, that says that the Murray-Darling Basin plan must be cognisant of the operation of the Snowy Mountain scheme and the Snowy Mountain water licence. Now, to my mind, this is contrary to the spirit of the scheme and why the scheme was built and financed by the Australian people. The releases and electricity generation are coupled in the scheme. You can't release water out of the scheme without generating electricity. The timing of the release is really driven by prices on the electricity market, and they can do that irrespective of what the downstream storages, such as human blowing, might be. They could be full or they could be nearly empty. And so it's a matter of where is the nation's priorities? Are the nation's priorities good, prudent water management and conservation, or are they electricity generation and market trading? I'd say it's a no-brainer.
It's a really interesting time to be in a rural community. Probably interesting is not the right word because it's an incredibly challenging time. Instead of having 720 kids, we're now down to 430, and the implications are enormous right across, not just within the school, but within the 4 towns, essentially, that this school services and all the farming areas in between. People in their 20s and 30s are disappearing in very large numbers, and that's a huge issue.
For me, I'd love to raise my kids in the country just because I've loved growing up on the farm and doing stuff that other people might not get the opportunity, and having bonfires and going fishing and just running around in the farm. So I've always loved that, and I'd like to raise my kids like that.
It's a small community and everyone's close, and that's what I want my kids to grow up in.
Right.
Like, I want them to grow up how I did.
Yep.
I love this community and I want to be close to my family, but I don't think there's really many options to do that.
One of the local schools closed purely because of the loss of the school children that had previously been from the employees of Torali. And there's uncertainty then if they can do it to one property, how many more can they do it to, where the government just comes in and totally changes the whole demographics and business economy of a community, and appearing not to worry about it.
In the middle of the worst part of the drought, there was hardly anyone working for us because we had to drop a lot of people, so Mum had to work more. So she was under a lot of stress, and I remember Mum and Dad having an argument about Dad just trying to get food for the cows.
There are so many good people who live in this part of the world, who work hard, who've got all the sorts of qualities that I would think as Australians we would admire, that we should never lose it.
It's going to affect everyone.
A criticism of the proposed plan is that it doesn't consider a long-term future. The plan prioritises the maintenance of the end of the system.
So there's a whole number of factors that are affecting the towns, the people, the agriculture, and the ecology of the basin. And the ecology has ended up being the thing that suffered the most, simply because man has created structures that it doesn't know how to manage properly.
Many question why the authority is trying to maintain the freshwater lakes at 0.75 metres above sea level, irrespective of how much water is in the system.
We've raised the level of this system from the barrages back to Lock 1 by almost a metre. So we've flooded a great deal of ground that was never flooded before. When we have a drought, we allow the lakes to go below sea level, which never ever happened before the lakes were connected to the ocean. It was impossible, that could never happen. And we created acid sulphate soils. We could have avoided all of that.
Where are we now? Where do we go from here? How do we make sure that the next time we have a severe drought of this type, that we don't have the same disastrous consequences we had last time?
One of the first things we should do is to consider a Lock Zero. We're suggesting to put in Lock Zero somewhere in the river above Wellington, which is at the head of the largest lake, Lake Alexandrina, so that we can then entrap that freshwater that otherwise would have flowed into the lake and use it better upstream for environment, of course, environmental purposes, and also to grow our food.
So we've got a largely degraded system with less river water to play with, and that's a very contested situation. And we know that through the basin plan. But we know the Coorong actually was naturally a tidal system, and at least in part so is Lake Alexandrina. So if I was looking for a ready supply of oxygenated, cool water close to here, I'd be looking the other side of this dune. Because the Southern Ocean goes for several thousand kilometres to the Antarctic, and it is the natural solution to the Coorong's problems.
About 3 years ago, in the middle of the drought, if the barrages had been opened at water, at sea level, then mixed the seawater with the river water, then we would have had a natural estuary at sea level, and these lake beds wouldn't have been exposed at all, and there would never be an acid problem. If the only water that we have available to keep our lake beds covered has to come from the ocean and form an estuary, then that's what we must have.
The beauty of having a different system there would allow it to be both freshwater and estuarine in times of high flow and low flow.
An estuary is really a far more dynamic living ecosystem than a pure fresh or even a pure marine. It's that ebb and flow and that variation that creates that dynamic intensity.
Certainly in terms of biodiversity, then a natural estuarine system would beat a dam, hands down.
Large environmental flows will have major implications for Australia's food bowl and detrimental effects on communities in the southern basin. 3/4 of this water is to flow to the lower lakes to keep them full.
I think there's a major mismatch between where the problems have to be solved, which is local knowledge, local detail, and a federal government, which is precisely why water is so seldom a federal issue in federal countries.
People don't appreciate where their food comes from. And in Australia, more than 90% of it is actually produced on Australian farms.
The people we've got now are the genuine farmers. They're the ones that care about the land, they care about what they do, they care about producing food and fibre. They're the ones that are being impacted now.
Politicians just work on this 3-6 year plan. We know it can't work that way. I mean, you have to be looking 20, 30 years ahead, if not longer. That's what the Asian economies are doing. That's what we're not doing. If we looked ahead to that sort of length of time, I think we'd have a different view on things.
We have some serious concerns about a figure. We believe this whole thing should be focused on outcomes, not figures.
Get rid of the number. The number is not the issue. The issue is how we manage the system.
What I would suggest is if you're going to manage this system now, you manage it not for the next 10 years, you put in an investment for the next century or more.
We really feel that that's fundamental to a successful plan before we start half-guessing at environmental needs and saying we need more water than what we actually might need in the reality.
So it is a question of social choices. How many wetlands do you want? How many gum trees do you want preserved? What size of flow do you want going to the lower Murray? What do you want to do about salinity, about acidification? These are all choices, not either or.
The drought is over, the system's full, it's wet. The whole eastern seaboard is, basically awash with water, so there is no rush, so we've got to get this thing right.
In extreme drought, I want an estuary, not these acres and acres of bare, wind-blown sand drifts, acids and so on.
So it's all a compromise.
What we hope to see is to see an Australia which can say, yeah, we dealt with the economics of water, we dealt with the social part of water, but we also found a middle ground in which we could deal in an adaptive and creative way with incorporating the environmental concerns into this.
It's been quite an extraordinary journey and quite a confronting journey, because I didn't actually understand the depths of the misinformation. And I think it's, the politicisation of the Murray-Darling Basin is going to cost all Australians enormously, both now with the $10 billion, but also well into the future, because we are making radical changes to our food bowl on the basis of poor process. And I think it's time that politicians actually recognise that they got it wrong and that they need to address more sustainable solutions than what they're currently proposing.